and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. We're going to kind of start off the broadcast diving into politics, and you see what happened in New Hampshire when it comes to the Democratic side. You have Bernie Sanders that beat Hillary Clinton, but Hillary Clinton is going to walk away with more delegates. And I have an article, excuse me, out of truththemedia.com. I wanted to cover, let me get it up here. Okay. Despite Sanders' win in New Hampshire, Clinton still has more delegates. Again, truththemedia.com. Following presidential candidate Bernie Sanders' first place finish in New Hampshire Democratic primary on Tuesday, rival Hillary Clinton, who finished a distant second, is set to gain the same amount of delegates in the state, which isn't the same amount. She was going to get 15. He was going to get 13. But it says here, Sanders, who won the state's primary with 151,584 votes over Clinton's 95,252 votes, gained 13 delegates. And the Hill reported that Sanders is expected to officially receive 15 when the total results are in. CNN and Yahoo Politics reported that Sanders and Clinton each currently have 15 delegates in New Hampshire. Oh, sorry. While Clinton won 9 delegates, Clinton also reportedly has the support of 6 superdelegates. New Hampshire has 8 superdelegates, 6 of which are committed to Hillary Clinton, giving her a total of 15 delegates from New Hampshire as of Wednesday at 9 a.m., the Daily Caller reported. The Hill reported that superdelegate support is fluid, though some of those delegates now backing Clinton could switch to Sanders ahead of the Democratic National Convention. But as it stands, the superdelegate support gives Clinton a total of 15 New Hampshire delegates. CNN's most recent estimate claims that Clinton has 431 delegates total and Sanders has 52 delegates. And estimate from the Associated Press has provided different numbers, claiming that Clinton has 394 delegates and Sanders has 42. And what I'm getting reports on from all these other news agencies out of New Hampshire, it's Hillary Clinton with 15, Bernie Sanders with 13, and 2 that are currently undecided, meaning that as it sits, Hillary Clinton has 15, Bernie Sanders with 13. The 2 undecided, if they went to Bernie, would mean that they would have the same amount of delegates, but the voting doesn't match it. Why is it? Because voting's a scam. When we vote for the Republican or the Democrat, because of course Americans, third party throwed your vote away. I think throwing your vote to idiots is throwing your vote away. But when you look at it, you're getting, when the presidential election actually comes down and you have a Republican and a Democrat running against each other, you have 2 people that didn't win their position. If Bernie Sanders won the votes, then he should get the no, because the delegates are different. So you voting in the primaries evidently isn't really causing any problems. Hillary, we already kind of know that let's just put it plain, she's a liar and manipulator. And you think the Democratic primaries are going to be different? No, they're not. Now I have another one. This one goes kind of towards the Republican side of the aisle here. And of course, this article came out of youthforrandpaul.com, so of course it will be biased, but it's really just pointing out a fact. Rand Paul out of the race is tied with Carson and Fiorina. I can never pronounce her name. Fiorina in New Hampshire with 3%. So someone that has dropped out of the race tied Carly and Ben Carson. And well, let's look at the results here. It says here, as of this article, 3 of the New Hampshire's 300 precincts vote at midnight on primary night, and the results have been officially tallied, with 1% of precincts reporting Rand Paul has 2.7% support in New Hampshire. And then here are the full results per WMUR New Hampshire as of 9:45 a.m. Ted Cruz had 9 votes. John Kasich had 9 votes. Donald Trump had 9 votes. You had Chris Christie with 3 votes. Jeb Bush with 2 votes. Mark Rubio with 2 votes. Rand Paul with 1 vote. Carly with 1 vote. Ben with 1 vote. And Jim with 0. Which that would have been Jim Gilmore. That meaning Ted, John, and Donald, 24%. Chris Christie, 8. Jeb Bush and Mark Rubio, 5. Rand, Ben, and Carly at 3. Now, of course, this probably changed. But it's kind of interesting that he'd be getting the votes like that when he's no longer in the race. Now, I want to cover this article here by Jeffrey Tucker. It's a really good one. Two Flavors of Tyranny, and you can find this at Foundation for Economic Education, FEE.org, FEE.org. Two Flavors of Tyranny, red or brown. Maybe you have noticed the strangely implausible similarities between the cobbled together platforms of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. On the surface, they represent opposite extremes. But in their celebration of the nation state as a people's salvation, their burning calls to overthrow the existing elites and replace them with a more intense form of top-down rule, they have much in common. Remember that the Nazis and communists hated each other in the interwar period, and of course fought each other to the bloody end in the war itself. After the Nazis lost control of the nations they conquered, the communists swept in, trading one tyranny for another. To imagine that these systems somehow represent polar opposites is bizarre. Both systems extolled the primacy of the state, both practiced economic central planning, both upheld the nation over the individual, both created a cult of leadership, both experiments in top-down social order ended in calamity and massive violations of human rights. How could these two systems so similar in operation be so antagonistic? I guess you had to be there. Back to the past. Oddly, we are there now. When it comes to politics, it's the 1930s all over again, or at least an updated version. We are actually living through a period in which the revolutionary left and the revolutionary right have merged, fighting the establishment to make government bigger, in a way that is mostly lost in their respective supporters. Sanders and Trump differ on particulars, though where exactly is not quite obvious. Yes, Trump is against gun control and Sanders extols it. Sanders wants to pillage the rich and Trump doesn't want to be pillaged. Sanders makes a big deal about global warming and Trump doesn't seem to take it seriously. But those are tweaks in idiosyncrasies in an overarching system on which they both agree. The nation state as the central organizing unit of life itself. They have different priorities on who it should serve and where the state should expand most, but they agree on the need to protect and enlarge state power. Neither accepts any principled limits on what the state may rightfully do to the individual. Even on big issues where one might think they disagree, healthcare, immigration, and control of lands by the federal government, their positions are largely indistinguishable. And yet, they and their supporters loathe each other. Each considers the other an enemy to be destroyed. This is not a fight about power as such, but about in whose service it will be used. Most of their supporters don't see it that way, of course. They imagine themselves to be rebels fighting power itself. However, they want to define it. Wall Street, the party establishment, the paid-off politicians, the bureaucracy, the billionaires, the foreigners, the special interests, and so on. But notice that neither attacks government authority as such. Both aspire to use it and grow it for their purposes. The marketing of control. Insight here is provided by Hayek, F.A. Hayek, in The Road to Serfdom, published in 1944, another time when such issues were pressing, clarifying that the difference here is not in substance but style. The conflict between the fascist or nationalist socialists and the older socialist parties must indeed very largely be regarded as the kind of conflict which is bound to rise between rival socialist factions, he wrote. There was no difference between them about the question of it being the will of the state which should assign to each person his proper place in society, unquote. What is the difference? It was a matter of the demographics of political support and the differing classes in society that expected to benefit from a total state. The old socialists sought support from within working classes and depended heavily on the support of intellectuals. The new form of socialists were supported by the young generation. Out of that contempt for profit making fostered by socialist teaching, these people spurned independent positions which involved risk and flocked in ever increasing numbers into salaried positions which promised security. They were demanding a place yielding them income and power to which their training entitled them, but which seemed perpetually out of reach. I'm going to pause that right there because if you think about this for 1 second, what are we getting with our college systems right now? A crap load of graduates that think they should just be handed the job that they went to school for. And in today's society, and this goes back years now, I don't know many college graduates that had college paid for them. They took loans out so they could go to college. They had loans that paid for their housing, their bills, and their school. They don't have to work. So not only now do we have more college graduates, we have more college graduates that have little to no work history and demanding jobs in the field that they went to school for. And when they're not finding them, they're getting angry and upset, and they need their safe space. And Bernie Sanders is going to give them their jobs that they should have. This is exactly the problem with our society. Just because you read a book, just because you were educated by a school or educated by yourself, does not grant you a position. You prove yourself to gain that position. You prove that not only did you read it, you understood it, and you know how to put it into practice. And it doesn't have to be in that field that you went to school for. What it needs to be is in the workplace. Because again, I know quite a few college graduates. They complain if they're not given a higher up position. They're late for work. In the job that they are given, they can't do properly or at all. They spend, good 80% of their time at work trying not to work and complaining why they're not in a better position when they went to school. Well, if that schooling gave you just that so much education that you should be above me, then you should be able to do my job and make me look stupid, but you can't even get that far. I want to get back onto this article here. Though he was talking about 1930s Europe, it seemed like a good description of Sanders supporters who overwhelmingly come from the youngest voters. Betrayed by the educational system. No, I don't think they're betrayed. Again, they're not thinking for themselves, so they just, oh, yeah, you go to school, you get a good job. Yeah. Doesn't work that way all the time. Definitely when everybody and their brother has a business degree. Back to the article. Stuck with a bleak job outlook, burdened with debt, trapped in a broken healthcare market, feeling like the system is rigged against them, they have turned to the politician who promises heaven on earth through the pillaging of the wealthy elites. And I'm sure I would be one of those elites to those people that might have degrees that aren't in as high of a position maybe as I am. They might feel like I'm the elite and that I don't deserve it because I didn't go to school. Never mind why they were in school. I learned the stuff on the job. I educated myself. I researched myself. I read my books without some teacher telling me to. Even though I don't have a degree to say, hey, I read so-and-so book, I took these class, I educated myself, I worked my butt off, and I showed people I've worked for that not only do I work hard, I learn, and I learn fast. And that's why any place I've ever worked at, I've quickly moved up. Because I'm willing to take that time off to learn not just the job I'm supposed to do, but basically everything about the product, the material, whatever it comes down to. I've taken that time to educate myself, sometimes even more than what the boss knew, because when I start asking questions and, I didn't even know that. That kind of makes an impression. And if those college graduates want to move up, make those impressions, not just wave a piece of paper in their face. Then you have the fascist and national socialist right with its own forms of scapegoating and its own class appeal. This approach says your troubles are due to the outsiders, the immigrants, the media elite, the Muslims, the intellectuals, and their political correctness. The appeal then is a new form of identity politics based on nation and race. To them, the idea of equality is a mere cover for a power grab, a subversive trick to further the interest of the elites and nefarious others. Replace failure with failure. As Hayek reminds us, neither faction emerged in a vacuum. Their tactics were developed in a world already dominated by socialist policy and the problem it creates. But instead of viewing the problem as statism itself, they push for state power to be used in a different way. The New York Times reported that Iowa Republican caucus goers are deeply unhappy with how the federal government is working. But for some reason, many GOP voters have yet to figure out that the military, the surveillance state, and immigration control that they love are the government they claim to hate. Last gasp. Why pay attention to the circus at all? It's fascinating to watch the crack up of the old failed political order. It is happening to both parties and also to the public sector they scramble to control. Their promise of better living through bigger bureaucracies have flopped. Meanwhile, in our daily lives, the future is with borderless distributed technologies, managed not by zero-sum elections, but by the digital marketplace. This is what is turning the world upside down. Still, the political sector continues to exist and becomes more unstable and ridiculous by the day. You can see this as tragic and terrible, or fun and delightful. I remind myself daily to choose the later route. Jeffrey Tucker, that was at Foundation for Economic Education, FEE.org. Check them out. Okay. I wanted to cover this. Okay. This was actually a Ron Paul Liberty report from last Friday. This isn't the one I covered on the broadcast, but this is one that I want to get into, and this it's about economics and how the government and also the Fed are manipulating the marketplace, but supply and demand still exist. Mythbusters, Ron Paul Liberty report, supply and demand still exists. Here we go.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. This is the day we do Mythbusters, and our co-host is Chris Rossini, and he is also the editor of the Ron Paul Liberty Report.com. Chris, welcome to the program.
Great to be back.
Did we eliminate all the myths out there, or do we still have a few to talk about?
The myths seem to never stop, so let's get right to it. Governments are constantly trying to outfox and outmaneuver the marketplace with their laws and regulations in their attempt to help their voters. But the marketplace maintains its perfect, unblemished record. The market always trumps the state, no matter what. So let's start with Walmart. News came out that they're closing 269 stores worldwide. And Walmart, as we all know, hires and employs a lot of low-wage workers. Now, Dr. Paul, do you think that government's increasing of the minimum wage had anything to do with this decision of Walmart in closing its stores?
Well, obviously I do. And this argument's going on for a long time, and the opposition have on numerous occasions refuted this. It has nothing to do with it, and they'll come up and probably try to show statistics that's not related. But I think it's very evident that minimum wage laws aren't helpful. But, you know, we can argue the economics of it, and I think the economics are on our side of this issue. But I like to get people to think about it as a moral issue. Because what this is a price control, and wage and price controls are bad. They're controlling wages to go up. Of course, that principle, if it's used, it also justifies the government for freezing wages, which they did in my lifetime in the early 70s, and it was total disaster. It's just the power that it gives. But even now, it's a regulation that hurts some people who really need some help. Take, for instance, if you have an individual who is a marginal worker, and the parents in that individual recognize that just give me a job. I don't want the $15. I'm very happy to take a job at $5 and I'll do my very best and this will make everybody happy. But no, this makes a prohibition. You put a minimum wage on, the company gets into trouble, so you exclude them because they won't be capable in any way of producing $15 worth of work and productivity. But there's always this dream that people aren't getting paid enough, and if you just boost their wages, things will be all right. And I might argue this is the case. There are some people who aren't making enough, but what you have to do is make the conditions where productivity goes up and that the person is able to produce more, and then the wages can go up. In a truly free market society, there's a high demand for labor, and there's a high demand that will eventually cause competition, so you have to raise wages in order to compete for labor. But we don't have a free market, and the mess that we have created today is something else. But Walmart is closing stores. They raised the minimum wage $15 up to $15, plan to go up to $15. But it was very interesting what the reaction was. This was for the very low income new workers. But the people who had entered the market earlier on said, that's not fair. We don't think you should give them such high salaries and wages because they can compete with us and they get making almost as much as we did. We had to work our way up here. And they resented it. So I think what happened there was Walmart decided, well, we got to take care of them. We'll raise wages on 500,000 people. But thousands of people have lost their jobs, and these stores are being closed. There's less cheap goods and services available to the smaller towns. And you say, well, maybe they made a mistake. They did make a mistake in many ways, and it was encouraged by the Federal Reserve. They opened these nearly 300 stores, and when they got into a little pinch because the government was forced to push up wages faster than they should have, and then they get into a financial crisis, then they have too many stores. But they might not have built these stores or indebted themselves because interest rates, they say, the interest rates are zero. We can take a chance and we'll go out and do it. But as soon as the market turns against them, all of a sudden you have this malinvestment out there that they have to deal with. So I definitely believe that this is a major factor, but not the entire factor. But I'd like to get people to think that this is a moral issue of people having voluntary contracts, and lo and behold, it produces a better environment. It produces more productivity. It produces a higher rate of employment. It produces a bigger middle class. And as a consequence, we see the shrinking of this. I think there was another episode that happened recently when Seattle raised the minimum wage, I think, up to $15, but the rest of the state didn't do it. But if you look at the statistics, the states, in the restaurant business around the state, they increased a lot of employment. But in Seattle, where the wages were forced up, the employment went down. There was no increase. There was actually a decrease. But I don't know how the Keynesian interventionists can explain this away and be satisfied that, that they're not doing more harm than good. They're motivated with good intention, but unfortunately they have been influenced by bad economics that they have been indoctrinated with for so many decades.
Yes, it's horrible economics to believe that government will ever beat supply and demand. Supply and demand will always exist no matter what government does or no matter what central banks do. And that's our next subject. With supply and demand and central banks, we have a report out of Zero Hedge that says that 36 Boeing 747s are hauling worthless banknotes into Venezuela, which means hyperinflation once again has hit, this time in Venezuela. Now, Dr. Paul, when will people realize this is another example of supply and demand overpowering central banks? When will people realize that we need sound market money instead of this centrally planned money?
Well, they're not going to realize it worldwide until the dollar suffers the same consequences. Right now, we see it. We see it in Zimbabwe and different countries. But one thing that you do to get runaway inflation is you get rid of computer money, checking accounts and all. They don't have the runaway inflation as much as once they starting printing notes, because people exchange it, it speeds up the velocity of money. People get it and they get rid of it. And it seems like the runaway inflation always involves notes. So we all have seen these Zimbabwe notes, billions and millions of dollars worth. As a matter of fact, I have signed a lot of those. People that I talk to on campuses, they're fascinated with what these numbers are. And that's what Venezuela is working for. And it's based on the myth that wealth can come out of a printing press or putting numbers on a piece of paper, which is absolutely false. And computer entries can't do it either. You have to have money as something that is of a limited supply. It has to be a commodity, and people have to be able to exchange it at will. But ultimately, the evil behind it, the incentive is, of course, government spending, welfare spending or war spending, and we're embarked on this. The real fallacy here is that a lot of people still think we're immune from it because Paul Krugman, as you've noticed in the past, sort of makes fun of us, and me in particular, that, well, Ron Paul predicted there'd be a lot of inflation, which there is a lot of inflation because that means the money supply's increased and there's a lot of malinvestment. And some prices go up faster than other prices, like bond prices go up. At the same time, maybe bread prices don't go up. But we're having a lot more inflation than they're willing to admit to. But the one reason why we haven't gotten to the Zimbabwe condition is because we issue the worldwide currency, the reserve currency of the world. So it still has a tinge of relationship to hard money. That was the gold standard because that's how it originated. But as long as there's a demand to buy our treasury bills and actually buy dollars, because there's not many other places to go, they're going to get by. Right now, we just went through a period of time when there was, in the last couple of years, the dollar has soared like 30% against the other currencies. But the markets are deciding right now, in the last couple of days, the dollar's gone down, and that means there will be more inflation. But the big thing is we've seen and read about South American countries and Zimbabwe and Germany in the 20s, but nobody ever says, oh yeah, tomorrow that's going to happen here. But we're living under conditions that never existed before with a worldwide fiat currency, which is the base of all the other currency. That is the reserve. That is the reason that if this gets out of control, it's going to be worse than anything ever before. It's going to be worse than Zimbabwe when you think that it's worldwide. And I think that's what we're moving into. And we've had no significant economic growth for the past 15 years. There's a lot of inflation out there, and all they have left to do is continue to print money, and they can't get interest rates any lower, so they're trying negative interest rates. Maybe that'll force the people to do the right thing. And of course, the follow-up with that is they will control cash and deny our right to use cash, which means the crisis is building, and it's going to end very badly for all of us. So we have to think about this once again in a moral issue. It's morally wrong to counterfeit money. You and I can't do it, and according to the Bastiat principle, if we can't counterfeit money, neither should a secret Federal Reserve counterfeit money for the benefit of the politicians and the special interests on Wall Street. That would go a long way just to understanding that basic principle, and we may well return rapidly to a free market economy.
Amen to that. Next, Dr. Paul, let's jump into a little bit of politics. And this is such a common myth, but let's cover it. We haven't covered it yet. Donald Trump is supposedly going to take our country back. Marco Rubio says the same thing. He's going to take our country back. But back to what? They're obviously not going to take it back to a time of greater liberty or respect for the Constitution. That's not even talked about. So, Dr. Paul, what do you think about this myth that gets recycled every 4 years by members of both parties? Depends on who's in power. What do you think about this myth?
Well, the myth is that they don't ask to what and what do they believe in and what principle are they going back to. There are couple good principles in history. There's good principles about not lying, cheating, stealing, and killing. That would be a good thing to take our country back to. Take us back to, a more concise understanding of the Constitution, the part of the Constitution that wants to restrain government, not to restrain the people. Yet that has been absent. But I don't think many people have that on mind. But going back, if you want to think about who's going back the most, is somebody who calls himself a socialist. Socialism has been around for a long time, and I use as one example the Plymouth Colony. They tried socialism at the Plymouth Colony. It was a disaster. The people died until they adapted to property rights and incentives and property ownership and rewards for working hard. And that more or less led into the American tradition of free markets and property rights. So I don't know what they're talking about, but I think they're talking more about the politics of it. Take the country back. Take it back from the people they don't like. And that is just a competition of power, because when the Republicans or the Democrats argue and fight, they're arguing not about, the issue of constitutionality, free markets, and sound money. They're arguing about whose friends are going to get bailed out first. So the Democrats have their friends, and Hillary has her friends, and the Republicans have theirs. Sometimes they overlap. Sometimes you get a Hillary that's making good money, from Goldman Sachs, and then you have a Ted Cruz who's making good money from Goldman Sachs. So there's a lot of overlapping there. But I think it's a personal thing. I think the argument and the fighting is very real, because they're very selfish with the power. They want to control this power, so they personally want to take things back. I don't believe for a minute that Donald Trump is interested in civil liberties and taking a position back that would introduce a libertarian society and a free society and sound economic policies. His record isn't there. And yet here we are. We have libertarians that are thinking, well, Rand's out of the race now. I guess we're going to have to go with Ted Cruz and the other candidates or Trump. And that is not going to be it. Taking the country back has to be understood that if you want to take something back, we actually have to go forward. We have to advance the knowledge and the understanding of how free markets work and move it where we have a better understanding than ever before about what liberty is. We have a better understanding today about what free markets are all about and monetary policy than it was even available to the founders of this country. So I don't want to go backwards in any way except maybe some basic truths. What we want to do is go forward with the advancement of the understanding and the imposition of liberty on all those who are willing to accept it.
Right. Finally, Dr. Paul, let's cover an issue. It's almost comical to even talk about this, but Hillary Clinton, who recently cashed in a nice $675,000 from Wall Street, comes out and says, yes, we need to crack down on Wall Street, but that's not enough. And Dr. Paul, the financial industry has close to 50,000 regulations on it as it is. Wall Street is surely not afraid of any type of government, quote-unquote, regulations. Perhaps if Hillary wants to crack down on Wall Street, she would force them to work in a free market. That would really scare them. What do you think about that idea?
Well, that's the whole thing. The free market, people say, oh, you guys are, laissez-faire. You don't want any regulation. No, the truth is we want a lot tougher regulations. When people overextend themselves and take risks, they may make money for a while, but then they go broke. But then they want bailed out. And they're too big to fail. A free market would never do that because we'd consider it theft. You took your risk and you lost. You bear the responsibility of that, and you don't get bailed out. The free market is very, very rigid in the regulation. You can't steal and you can't defraud people. You have to follow up on your promises. But there is a lot of regulations under these conditions. But a lot of times you hear Bernie Sanders, who, if you don't check it out, will say something that I possibly could say, and that is you got to crack down on certain financial interests, the ones who are benefiting from the government, and that's entirely different. That's entirely different than cracking down on free markets. He wants to crack down on wealth. And both of us want to crack down on crony capitalism. And that is the whole thing. The real myth there is that if you say crack down on Wall Street and it's really crony capitalism, that's a lot different than cracking down on all successful people who make money by making an honest living and not getting any special benefits from the government. The other thing we have to realize is that if you resort to trying to correct the mistakes of the Federal Reserve, that is, the Federal Reserve messes up the market. They're an economic planner, and there's always going to be mistakes. So they think, okay, we admit there's a mistake, so what we have to do is regulate people. And the Fed gets all these powers to regulate. And that doesn't work at all. The regulations get out of control. And guess what? If you want banking regulations, because the Fed deals with banking, guess who will write the regulations? It won't be the free market. It won't be treating everybody equally. It will be the people who have accumulated a lot of wealth, who are going to get bailed out, that will then buy Congress, and they will write the regulations. Literally, a lot of times they do, just like, the drug companies write the regulations for the FDA. So the special interests, when they realize the system is going, it just builds this special interest system. That is what I think the people like Bernie Sanders and conservative regulators, they come up with all kinds of schemes because they won't go to the seat of the problem, and that is the problems come because government's too big. The role of government is that most people accept that it should be big. We should continue with 45 million people on food stamps, and we should take care of the military industrial complex. They won't do that. So therefore, we have to have the Fed to finance this, and then they get powerful. So if you had a government that was designed only to protect the liberties of the people and not to be the policeman of the world, not to regulate the economy, and not to regulate your personal lifestyle, you wouldn't have this at all. You'd still have the problems, but you would have the problems that would be isolated, should be dealt with because somebody committed violence. It would be a local issue. But if we allow this to continue, believe me, it'll just make a lot more trouble for it, and we'll continue this process, and you can't solve the problems with more regulations. It's been too much regulation and too much government is the problem. And the sooner we realize that and look for guidance from the Constitution, say the purpose of the Constitution and really the goal that was originally set many years ago was to protect the individual liberties of people, not to make everybody safe and secure and provide the safety nets for the poor, which end up being a safety net only for the rich. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and I want to thank you, Chris, for joining us today on Mythbusters.
Always a pleasure, Dr. Paul. Thank you.
Very good. And to the audience, I thank you for tuning in, and please come back soon to the Liberty Report.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Also, subscribe to him on YouTube and check out his daily Ron Paul Liberty Reports. Now, with the whole Walmart moving, people go, well, it's greed. Well, we know Walmart to be greedy. We know this. You still shop there. It is a result of regulation and manipulation of the monetary policies. And I still look at it as a good thing for you and me. When Walmarts start closing, I think that's a good thing for the local community. Because now mom and pop stores can pop up once again. There's always it's one of those things where there's always that double-edged sword where because of that they're going to move or not open or not create more jobs. But a lot of the times, it's not the big corporations like Walmart that suffer. It's the mom and pop stores. But the thing is, the mom and pop stores have been ran off. Why? partially to do with the regulation. That's what helps initiate it. Just because a Walmart pops up doesn't mean stores are going to close. But when a Walmart pops up and they can have the land taken from people to build the Walmart, claim that they're providing a necessary service to the community because, well, they carry everything. When they can abandon buildings and let the city deal with it. When regulations start affecting the little man, but Walmart can afford to pay a fine. They don't care. As long as it's not going to shut them down. No, not shut them down. Well, we help write the laws. We know that a lot of the top corporations in America help write the laws, help write the regulation. Why do you think they get bailed out? Why do you think that, they can get away with things? Go ahead and try half of what these corporations do just as yourself. As you, John Doe or Jane Doe. Go out there and try to do half of the stuff that these big corporations do. Go ahead and pour some contaminated water somewhere. See if you have the cash to pay that fine. Then, as a small business owner, oh yeah, you don't have the cash either? Well, guess what? All these large corporations can pay that fine. They play the, let's weigh the benefits and the risk of doing this. Well, yeah, we'll have to pay a fine, but even paying that fine will save us this much money. Let's do it. But what's happened is, well, they've already ran out most mom and pop stores. Not all of them. There, of course, there's people that hold on, but they ran off the majority of them enough that Walmart tends to be a dominant store in its area. And they had a great business model. Put everything in one store. People don't have to run 6 different places to get what they need. They can stop one place, get everything they need, and go right home. But now the beast that these large corporations help create is now going to eat them alive. So much that we even have, I seen an article about Ford coming out and saying everything Donald Trump says was true or something to that extent. And I was like, well, yeah, to a point, but not entirely. And I lay a lot of the burden on you and me. We make the choices where we shop. Well, I only make so much money. You still make the choices of where you shop. I, at times, will go without a lot of stuff that I want and sometimes even need. I'll hold off to buy it from a local store. I've tried to make that conscious effort to do so. Does that mean I don't shop at Walmart at all? No, I do shop at Walmart. I can be a little hypocritical on that. But I try to shop other places. I take the effort to make Walmart my last stop. what I could not find other places. Stuff that I might absolutely need for the week. I'll stop at Walmart. What we have a lot of times is people that will talk about buying local. You won't ever see them buy local. And I try to do as much as possible. I don't just get on the mic and talk a good talk. I do take a invested effort in making sure I'm doing as much as possible to shop locally, support local owned companies. Even a place I work on weekends, I try to support local companies, local owned, family owned companies. That doesn't mean I won't boycott one. If I feel that their customer service sucks or their products or services suck, I don't care if you're local owned. I'll go to the, big company if they're better customer service and all that. So, everything plays into it. It's something I definitely, in another broadcast, want to get farther into and get into the buying local and even becoming your own local service or company or, provider of whatever your local community needs. So I'm trying to get this up here. Okay, this was a special from Mises Institute, Mises Weekends, and it was Ron Paul, Socialism and War Will Not Prevail. So, again, this is from Mises Institute, Mises Media on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. This is a little bit of a long one here, but this is something I definitely want to get into. And I think we are really, when we look at the whole political scene where you got Trump and Bernie, you read Hayek, you read, all of these philosophers, it become one book I want people to pick up is The Law by Bastiat. And you just look at things like Bastiat and Hayek, and you look at where they were writing from. And you look at where we are now, and you go, why are we repeating history? I think a lot of it comes from people discarding Hayek and Bastiat. We've not seen that in the school system. Why is that not being taught? Why do we push one way? And I've come to the conclusion, when times are good, a freedom lover, a liberty lover, someone that understands what it is finally getting to enjoy that. They're getting to live free. They get to prosper. And when people that might not try that hard, or, bad luck, see someone living free and prospering, or, I know a lot of it comes down to bad choice with a lot of people. We make bad choices. I've been knocked down from bad choices. I don't go, well, it's all those rich people's fault. No, I put myself in that situation. There's chances I've had to go far in certain areas and have chosen out because of fear. That's one thing, that I've in the past 15 years have been able to shed, is that fear. Yeah, I would like to start a company, or I'd like to make some money on the side. I want to do it, I'm doing it. And, that's also why we get where we are. Because, well, when you live in a freer society, you tend not to see the importance of shoving, things like Hayek and Bastiat down kids' throats. You're trying to get them to enjoy life. But people that are envy your life, that make bad choices and blame them on everybody else, will shove that socialist stuff down other people's throats. And then they'll have those people also not furthering themselves, spending all their time talking about how people that have prospered are bad people. But then we come full circle eventually, because then people that put themselves in a jail cell and see the people that weren't going to put themselves in a jail cell walking around freely, they go, maybe the jail cell wasn't quite a great idea. And I think that's where we're going to be going in the future. But I do want to get into this, Ron Paul. Socialism and war will not prevail. This special from Mises Media on YouTube, Mises.org. Check them out.
Our guest this weekend is none other than my former boss, Dr. Ron Paul. And I'm surprised in looking back over the archives to see that we have never had Dr. Paul on our Mises Weekend show. So we need to rectify that, and we need to have him on as a live guest in the very near future to handle some Q&A. But for now, enjoy a great speech Dr. Paul gave this past weekend at our Mises Circle event in Houston, including a great reference to how Bernie Sanders doesn't seem to understand that the Plymouth Colony experiment in America was actually a failure. Stay tuned and have a great weekend.
One thing I think about when we think, what is ahead for us, and how can you predict what happens in the various civilizations over the many centuries? And even in our lifetime, certainly in the 20th century, the most onerous of civilizations and empires was the Soviet Empire, and it came to an end. Now, the important characteristic of the end of the Soviet Empire was the fact that we didn't need a nuclear exchange. It disintegrated from within. And I think this is basically true. Outside forces have something to do with it, all the way back to the Roman Empire, but basically empires, good or bad, disintegrate from within. So I believe that is what our contention has to be right now, is what is happening to our country from within. And actually, it's very encouraging. They're disintegrating. It's giving us an opportunity. We don't have to go to war with them. They're going to self-destruct. Keynesianism is coming to an end. All they have to do now is dictate to us that every bank has to give us, will be required to have negative interest and get rid of cash. And I think finally the American people will wake up and maybe revolt against this insanity. Throughout history, and history is rather short, human history, recorded history is probably 5,000 years, and it's vaguely recorded back then. I was trying to find out the exact date the Ten Commandments were written, and you really can't find. You can't even get the date exactly when Moses brought down the tablets with the Ten Commandments. But even then, when you go back, you'll find out that a lot of those principles were even known with the Assyrians 200 or 300 years before Moses issued the Ten Commandments. But one thing that seems to have been the motivation there is to set some rules. Civilization was coming about. It was rather primitive, but they knew they had to have some rules for the people in order to survive. And if you look at what the basic rules were and what they were trying to design, very, very libertarian. And it basically, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, and don't murder. And it's found in most of the great religions. And it was designed, of course, to limit the hostilities and the violence of individuals to bring about civilization. And, of course, the government was supposed to be very much involved in this. And that is where we come up short, because the government hasn't done a very good job in doing this. We've seen maybe the reversal of that. But, we had the Ten Commandments established, and the move on generally over the many centuries was to see if we could develop, the human race could develop a set of standards for tranquility and peace, and try to curtail the power of government. So a major event occurred in 1215 with the Magna Carta, establishing, that we that governments can't hold us, and governments should be held responsible to the same laws. And this was a significant event. It wasn't the event of all history, but it suggested that the kings had to live under the same laws that the people lived under. And the British followed this to some degree and tried to improve on that over the many years. Now, another significant date, from my viewpoint, occurred when the people got disgusted for various reasons what was going on in Europe and in Britain and the different places. So they heard about America and they wanted to come to America. And the one particular settlement that I think stands out in history that we should pay attention to was the Plymouth Colony in 1620. And it was a bad deal. I mean, they came over, and the percentage of people that died was horrendous even after they got here. But they developed a system of pure socialism, collectivism. Everybody worked together, and whoever needed to eat, they would take the food. And lo and behold, the people weren't working very well, and they weren't doing well. So Bradford finally comes along, and he has this brilliant idea. It had been floating around a bit about that time. He said, let's give up on this. This not have socialism. This is a new country. What we want to do is allot property rights to certain people, and you're on your own. Go what you want and raise what you want. And lo and behold, to their tremendous surprise, there was great productivity. People produced more than they needed. And then they automatically started taking care of the people who weren't capable of raising their own crops. And it was in many ways burying in our early history the concept of socialism. And of course, in our early history, there was much more individualism, and there was much more incentives built into it. And we were moving into an age of thinking about capitalism and Adam Smith and these other events. And that actually went pretty well, but it was really established in 1776, another bold move on the part of our ancestors to put together and make a declaration of independence for the individuals, emphasize the individual. And this was one thing that Murray Rothbard had pointed out, that one of the reasons why individuals were considered important, and he gave credit to Christianity and the importance of the individual. And in that sense, Christianity did have an influence on our culture and our society. But this was a major event, and we did benefit for a long time in that manner, for up to where I think the progressive era started in 1898. Then all of a sudden, the progressive moved in and set the stage for the 20th century, which did not go well. and people capitulated to progressivism, and they forgot about Plymouth, and they went down and they had a more sophisticated method of promoting socialism. And in the 20th century, brought together two groups, the conservative warmongers as well as the liberals, to brought them together, the use of force, and we ended up with socialism, welfarism, special interests, and a concept where, especially under Woodrow Wilson, that we had a responsibility to make the world safe for democracy. Well, guess what? The world didn't become safe, and it didn't become, in their terms, democratic. It was a disaster. So if we could do one thing, maybe we could repeal Woodrow Wilson, including the income tax and the Federal Reserve System. But the 20th century I see as downhill, and the communism ended. That's the good part. But now, instead of taking advantage and getting a peace dividend in the 1990, as the Soviet system collapsed, the world was enthralled with interventionism, Keynesianism, inflationism, and all the nonsense that had been going on. But we're now at the point where it is recognized that it's doomed. It can't work. It's not going to work, and something has to replace it. That's what the Mises Institute is all about, and the many other groups that we have now, is to provide the answers to what is the replacement going to be. We don't have to think about how many tanks are we going to have to invade Washington, D.C. They have more tanks. They have bombs and drones and everything else. But believe me, ideas are much more powerful than those tanks that they don't even know how to run and won't even have the fuel to run eventually. So I would say stick with the ideas of liberty to combat the disaster of the 20th century. I think the opening salvo of this event came in the year 2000 in the financial markets. It was the NASDAQ bubble, which was predicted by the Austrian economist. It was way out of proportion, and the crash came. And most people thought, well, it came, but haven't we been doing quite well since? I don't believe so. I think it's been a disaster ever since. And the jobs leave the country. The inflation is still there. Liberties are being reduced. So I believe that event led into, the perpetuation and the desire to have even more and more bubbles. And of course, they think the bubble is the correction to the bubble phenomenon when the bubble bursts, which we all know can't work and won't work. If you have a problem of debt and too much spending and too much government, you can't correct that by just expanding government regulations and government printing in more debt. So we're facing that today, and the American people, are really in a quandary. There's a lot of anger out there. This election is different than the other elections. It's a lot worse because I think there's more confusion than ever. But everybody is angry. The people who aren't getting enough are angry, and the people who are sick and tired of paying for it are angry. And sometimes they're very confused as to who is the real cause. And I think it's demonstrated. All you have to do is listen to those debates. But when I talk about the debates and the candidates, I do have one exception. I'm not accusing them all of misunderstanding economic policy. So the people are confused and looking for it, but I think the politicians look for scapegoats. If we can just blame somebody, this would do the trick. So it's the immigrants. The immigrants are coming, and indeed it is a problem, but it is a consequence so often of economic policies. It's the economic problems that we face in this country where there is a disintegration of the middle class, and there's individuals who are on the dole. There's too much welfareism, too much rewards for not working, and then too many rewards for people who come illegally. And why are they leaving? Are they leaving because of being bombed? Some. Certainly that's true in Europe. but they're coming from South America and Central America because they have lousy, stinking economic policies, and they're just begging and pleading and looking for an answer. So I think that the message of liberty and the message of free markets and the message of sound money, there's a universal need for this, and to me, it's the only answer. I don't for a minute think building fences will do it. I think there has to be more interchange between those of us who understand economic policies and those others who are struggling. So that a lot of people who are migrating and immigrating come as economic consequence. It's a bad economic problem. Then it's compounded by our bad economic problems, and people get angry and upset, and jobs go overseas, and they say, well, the solution to that is terrorists, let's raise terrorists, and do all this nonsense. So it's an opening. But the Austrian School of Economics, groups like the Mises Institute, can provide the answer, and it's crucial because it's who puts it back together that counts. I think we're in a good position because nobody else has anything worthwhile. What we have to worry about is how violent and chaotic is this going to get. And that's what's really dangerous, because there could well end up with riots not only in our streets. We see the pictures already in Europe. But it's even worse in Europe because they are suffering the consequences of our foreign policy. It is true. There's a lot of people leaving these countries. Yes, you could say, well, some of them are coming in there to undermine the culture of Europe, and they certainly seem to be achieving that. But some of them are coming to escape bombs. You know, if they had good economic policies and we weren't bombing them, believe there would be a lot less immigration from the Middle East into Europe or even into this country. So the answer to this, of course, is to have sound economic policies, but we have to have a sound foreign policy as well. And foreign policy, for those of us who believe in the non-aggression principle, is that we don't have military forces spread around the world. Not only does it cause more trouble, it distracts from defense of a country, costs a lot of money. We create a lot of enemies. And what does it do? It adds on more costs. So it's a bad cycle that we're on. But Europe, I believe, is in a real mess. The whole world is in a financial situation that could come down on our heads just any time. And yet, we have the answers in the issue with the issue of liberty, free markets, property rights, and a lot less government. That is what I think would come a long way to solving our problems. But in order for people to make use of this out of ignorance or deliberately, in order to advance the power of the state, there's a lot of demagoguery that has to go around, and a lot of fears. People act because they get scared. They get scared economically. Who's going to take care of me? And they get fearful that we're going to be attacked. And yet it's very, very difficult to get a people to look at themselves. It's hard for individuals to look at oneself to improve one's person and one's character. But this is what is very, very difficult, because of course I've experienced that. Any suggestion that we may have had a flawed policy in foreign policy, and I did not support this endless warmongering going on. I was considered un-American and unconcerned about our troops, and literally get booed by Christian communities, because the only answer to this is to drop more bombs. We need to show them how tough we are, not realizing that's the cause of the problem. You say, well, aren't there a lot of those bad guys? That's the argument we always hear. There's a lot of bad guys out there. Don't we have to get rid of them? I say, no, we don't. Did we have to do that with the Soviets? No, we ended up probably being much too close to them rather than saying that we had to go in and do anything about it. And that's just a distraction, because you look at the alliance that we have with Saudi Arabia, and they're not exactly the champions of civil liberties. And yet at the same time, we're yelling and screaming because we hear something and we don't want to deal with Saddam Hussein and the other dictators, or China. Oh, they violate civil liberties. Well, what do you think they think of us? What do you think the people from the Middle East think of us when they see us torturing people and rounding up kids and bringing them here and keeping them for 20 years without charges being made? But we should be able to look at ourselves. But of course, what we have to do is get people to accept some basic principles. You know, the trend over those many centuries that I talk about, it was always there to give more freedom to the individual. And the government was sort of there, and their job was to enforce laws. But I think what has happened now is we had a pretty good code over those many centuries developed on how we as individuals should act in a very non-aggressive way. Don't lie, cheat, steal, or kill. Murder, not to do it. What do we have today? We have a government that lies, cheats, steals, counterfeits, murders people around the world, puts our people in prison without charges and have it become legal. At the same time, we see proposals today introduced by the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate to say that, well, what we must do is give more power to the president so he never has to bother coming and being annoyed with the Congress. He needs more war power so that he can go any place, anytime around the world and use the military if he doesn't like what's going on, including in the United States as well. So I would say it's time for the American people to get this information and realize that our greatest threat is coming from within by the doctrinaires of individuals who don't have the vaguest idea of sound economics, and if they do, they fear it because they'll lose their power. They don't understand what real liberty is all about, and so therefore they become fearful, and they claim the sole and most important responsibility of government is to make us safe. Yet you can't even find that in the Constitution. They didn't say, hereby we declare the United States' whole purpose of the federal government is to make sure that everyone is safe and they have a safety net and free education, free medical care, and the whole works. No, it's not there. The whole purpose there was to write a bunch of rules trying to restrict the government and trying to restrain the government and to make sure they live within the laws of the land. But here today, we have the government doing exactly what took centuries to try to get the people of the world to act responsibly to advance civilization. Now, in spite of all of this, I think civilization has done quite well over these many years, in spite of all the shortcomings. But my disappointment has been that with all the intelligence, and this is such a short period of time, the ideas of freedom so short, it's just hundreds of years, really, when it was really since the Industrial Revolutions. It's not like centuries on centuries, just hints have occurred. And so much advancement has occurred. I mean, the universe, billions and billions of years old, and nobody knows exactly the age. It's not brand new. But the ideas of mankind advancing to the stage where they even have the concept of liberty and the importance of the individuals, very, very short. The advancement, and now the movement is so much more rapid with the advancement of the exchange of information on the internet. We have it moving quickly. I mean, the ideas of liberty over the many centuries, starting all the way back with the Ten Commandments and the Magna Carta, that was very slow and tedious. But there's no reason why ideas can't move faster. Now, in the industrial age, industrial revolution, tremendous progress. Just think of our standard of living in spite of the government. Our standard of living keeps going up. But why haven't we had some advancement in the social affairs, getting along with people and trying to take our intelligence and saying, why do we have to resort to war? I think most people want peace. I think most people still today, nobody would admit, at least, that, oh yeah, we got to get rid of that stupid law that says you shouldn't lie, cheat, or steal or murder. No, they still believe in that, but they are too careless about it, and they allow the government to do it. So the only way I can see progress for humankind, as well as us here in the United States, is to take our intelligence and take this ability to spread information, show the importance of the individuals, and take what was given to us even early on with the libertarian principle of no aggression. Now, is that so much to ask from people? All we want you to do is say, I'm never going to initiate violence against another person or property, and I promise to do what I say. I will do exactly as I promise. And that is not too overwhelming, yet people are intimidated because of false ideas. They make them scared, and the people just roll over and say the solution is more government. And we have to really make the case for not only the American people, but for the world, why we can't take this advanced step and take the intelligence of the human race and the ability to communicate, worldwide. I don't want closed borders, but I want ideas and people to exchange views and go back and forth. And this is happening. I get so many calls and emails. I mean, this past week, I think, Daniel and I got a receipt of, somebody, took one of my books and translated it into Chinese, and somebody else translated another book into German. And they said, well, is there going to be a charge? And no, the more the merrier. Print it, spread the message. I mean, this is what's going on today. And, there was a time when you wouldn't even know about it. Well, we don't know about it. This is activity. So I think there's certainly a room for a revolution, but not the revolution of Bernie Sanders. He's going back to Plymouth Colony, and we don't need that. We need to look forward to the days when liberty will thrive and that prosperity will exist and we will have peace in the world. Thank you very much.
Mises Institute, Mises.org, Mises Media on YouTube. I know that was kind of a long one, but when we look at where we're headed right now, we have people that call themselves libertarians going for Bernie Sanders. People that call themselves libertarians going for Trump. Or even Ted Cruz for that. If you can't see the writing on the wall, you are blind. We have no candidate. This was what was most, how should I say it? This is the main thing that Rand Paul couldn't grasp, that his father was able to unintentionally hit the nail on the head, is just being really core principle. I think Rand Paul tries to play with the other side way too much instead of just standing on a solid ideological foundation like his father did. That's what really got people into Ron Paul. You could go back to grainy filmage of Ron Paul speaking on the floor. And he would say the same stuff he says today. But Rand Paul, you couldn't say that with. He's even had a shorter time on the stage. And you can't say that about him. Now, where we're sitting at this election worries the hell out of me. Because I'm looking at how large government is right now. What steps under Obama, the steps that Obama and the rest of the government are taking under his leadership. And I'm seeing, four front runners. I'll pit Cruz with Trump and Bernie and Hillary. We're looking at these four people to take us back towards more freedom, less government. It's not going to happen. Get Ted Cruz, monetary policy is definitely not going to change. The military-industrial complex is not going to change. People are like, but he talks about the Federal Reserve. Yes, and he misses the vote to audit the Federal Reserve. His wife works for Goldman Sachs. He's not changing a damn thing with the monetary policy. You got Donald Trump playing on the emotions of a lot of Americans. But what those emotional people don't understand is building a wall will hurt you. All these policies will end up turning around and biting you in the butt. Yeah, he might get hurt, but it's going to be after everybody else's. Definitely with his foreign policies, but most with his domestic policies. And those emotional people. I like what he says. We get rid of those illegal aliens. Well, you know what? He's going to put laws into place that we see over and over used against you. We have to surveil people. We got to keep surveillance on those terrorists. Oh yeah, keep surveillance on terrorists. Yay. While they're keeping your phone records. We need armored vehicles and stuff to go out after these bad criminals. They got all kinds of weapons and stuff. And some guy bought a joint. Let's knock raid him with a tactical military operation and tank and armored vehicles and flashbangs. Again, it will constantly be used against you. All you have to do is look at history. There has not been a law that has been put in place that has been used exactly how they said it would be. Not a damn one. They always turn around and use them against innocent people or people that are not causing any problem. Well, that guy bought a joint. Okay, he bought a joint. Who gives a crap? But I bet you that neighborhood where he lived and smoked his joint, when you came through there with a damn army with military gear, military vehicles, flashbanging, making it look like a war zone, I bet you that disturbed the community. Of course, you'll brainwash them. You'll be like, yeah, this was all because this guy had marijuana. They go, yeah. We don't want people with marijuana because that's what happens. Again, brainwashed. No, he didn't call them out there. He would have probably smoked that joint, ate a bag of chips, and fell asleep. Who cares? That's not why they were out there. They were out there because somehow they believe they have the authority to tell someone what they can put in their body. Well, I don't smoke marijuana, so I don't care. I'm going to go get my raw milk down. Bam, you're raided. Or that farm's raided. We even see people that do it the legal way. You buy shares into the farm, meaning you own part of the cow that you're getting your milk from. You have a ownership of those cows. Legally, if you have ownership of the cow, you can have the milk from the cow without pasteurizing raw milk. But we even see those people get harassed. Okay, give me a second here. Okay. Maybe. Okay, yep, here it goes. This from truthandmedia.com, a reality check. What Trump's love of eminent domain tells you about his values. Now, we have so many people, oh, we love freedom and liberty. We want Donald Trump. What? Let's get into this and we'll get more into Donald Trump here. Hopefully this audio works here.
Well, eminent domain is wonderful. So says Donald Trump. It's one area where the populist candidate may be showing his real values. This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else. So Donald Trump says eminent domain is a very good thing, and he says he knows from personal experience.
Nobody knows this better than I do because I built a lot of buildings in Manhattan, and you'll have 12 sites and you'll get 11 and you'll have the one holdout and you end up building around them and everything else. Okay, so I know it better than anybody.
Yeah, and maybe he does. Over the years, Donald Trump has made a fortune in real estate, and the most important thing in real estate? Location, 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 right? Eminent domain is where government takes property away from individuals for projects that are supposed to have significant value for public use. The public use clause of the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, it's nothing new, but it was in 2005 when a Supreme Court case called Kelo versus the City of New London really expanded things. The Supreme Court's decision in Kelo allowed state and local governments to seize land from one private owner and then give it to another private owner to further economic development. Translated, local governments can take property away from poor people and give it to private wealthy people for private development. And one of those people who has loudly applauded this practice, Donald Trump. Speaking about the Kelo decision, Trump told Fox's Neil Cavuto, quote, "I happen to agree with it 100%. If you have a person living in an area that's not even necessarily a good area, and government wants to build a tremendous economic development where a lot of people are going to be put to work and create thousands upon thousands of jobs and beautification and lots of other things, then I think It happens to be good. But Trump says eminent domain is also necessary, that people can get 5 times what their property is worth, and that there is a need for eminent domain, building roads, laying sewer lines, etc. But Trump does not just support eminent domain for those purposes. He also supports them for building casinos. According to Reason magazine, in 1994, Trump sought to personally profit from eminent domain by using government power to kick an elderly widow out of her Atlantic City home. That woman, Vera Kokin, lived just off of Atlantic City's famous beachfront boardwalk. Trump wanted to take her home and replace it with a new limousine parking lot for the nearby Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino. Well, thanks to expert legal help from the Institute of Justice, whose lawyers represented Kokin, the organization representing Trump lost in court. So what you need to know is that while Vera Kokin kept Trump at bay, he says he would have paid $5 million for that home. Kokin's grandson says he actually offered $1.9 million, but in the end, the home eventually sold for $580,000. But here's the truth. Vera Kokin didn't want $2 million. She didn't want $5 million. She wanted her home, and that should be her right. What should not be allowed is for anyone to tell you that money is more important than what you own, and therefore anyone who has enough money has the right to just come and take it away. If Donald Trump believes that, it should make others question what he actually values. That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that tonight on Twitter.
So what does he value? Well, he doesn't value your right to personal property. He doesn't have any, hey, that's a widower. She probably wants to die in the house that her and her husband shared. No, he wanted a damn freaking parking lot. And you want this idiot a-hole as our president? You might as well just give him the keys to your house, to your car. And if Bernie gets it, give him your keys to your house or your car. Because basically, when I see people going, Bernie or Trump, I'm going, I like kicked by the left foot. I like being kicked by the right foot. A whole bunch of freaking people that want to be kicked around by government. Well, as long as they're kicking the other side, well, if they put the, bills into Congress or pass the right laws, eventually that foot's going to end up kicking you in the butt. Because, well, unless one of them becomes a dictator, more than likely the next party will come into power eventually. Guess who they're going to take their anger out on? Well, the whole time you've been having Trump kicking the left in the butt with, the right foot, once they get in office, they're going to do the same to you. And we wonder why we hate each other so much. Because we're willing to vote people in that will constantly go after the other people. We won't vote for someone that says both sides need to mind their own damn business and just live their freaking lives. That state and local governments better mind their P's and Q's. Because if they go around abridging people's rights, we'll come in, slap them around. But nowhere would that candidate be slapping other people around. But we got where we are today because we constantly do the same crap over and over and over. We're mad at the left. We need an angry right person. But guess what? You're voting for a progressive. You're voting for someone that will progress the growth of government. Whether you go for Bernie or you go for Donald Trump or you go for Hillary Clinton or you go for Ted Cruz. Basically what you're seeing, Ted and Hillary, they'll take it a little bit slower maybe. Bernie and Trump, they're loose cannons, so you can't tell what they'll do and when. You can tell that just by the crap that comes out of Trump's mouth. People are like, well then, who would you vote for? None of them. Well, you're just going to give it to the other side. What other side? There is no other side. That's the illusion that you believe in, not me. You will get screwed either way. And that's probably what worries me the most because, I talk about it all the time. I want to see a peaceful revolution towards freedom. True freedom. Even if we reverse course and, I know things aren't going to happen overnight, so it might take a while, but we're not even voting for those type of people. We're going, which one will grow government the slowest? Now we're like, hey, we just don't care. This guy hates the other side. That guy hates the other side. So we'll go with the guy that hates the other side. Yeah, that'll work out for you. Hate always works. Hate doesn't start wars. Never. Well, we might end up seeing a civil war if this crap keeps going on. And I'm warning people right now. You keep voting for people, Trump, Hillary, Ted, Bernie, Bush, Carson. Who's wrong with Carson? Carson doesn't know what the hell he's talking about most of the time. That's just simple fact. Might be an outsider, but I don't want an uneducated outsider that, would have to ask other people, what the hell does that mean? Hey, Carson, yeah, that just means that, yeah, you just sign the paper. Okay. This is worse than when Ron Paul was running. Ron Paul had a hell of a following. Ron Paul, they had to play dirty tricks during the Republican National Convention to ensure that he didn't get enough delegates, even though he wouldn't have, according to him. And I watch people vote for others, but I seen the large following. It gave me hope for the future. When I see parts of that large following go towards Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, I go, the best thing you could do is not vote. Honestly, best thing you could do is not vote. I want to see a day when 5% of the population turns out to vote. And a whole, small percentage of that actually is what elects our president. And we can sit there and go, you know what? If 2% of the population can vote the president, it's illegitimate. There's absolutely no way you can justify it. When people go, I will not vote because there is no candidate that will let me live free. Or no candidate that won't put things into place within government that will eventually be used against me. Even if I don't care, about the other people because, well, they live that type of lifestyle or they do this. Eventually it'll turn around and bite you in the butt. And I think that should be evident to anybody that has watched and listened and read things on the internet. When you see, oh, whoa, they just raided the wrong house with military gear and flashbanged a baby. Because you guys didn't like the marijuana smoker or the heroin. Well, they break in the home. Well, that's probably not the pothead. What the other drug people do, they'll break a home, steal stuff, and sell it to get their drugs. So what you're saying is that breaking into your home, breaking and entering, theft of property, you can't charge them with that? They have to make it arbitrary because he was on heroin and did it? What if the guy was on 2% milk and robbed your place and blamed it on the 2% milk? Would you want to make up a law to charge him with robbing and breaking and entering while on milk? See, I don't care if someone breaks into my house because they were on crack, heroin, or because they were bored. They broke into my house. That's what I care about. Now, if they would have stayed home and stayed bored at home or stayed high on their drugs at home, guess what? It wouldn't bother me. Well, that's why the drugs are bad, because they cause people to do it. Really? That's funny, because I've worked at a few places that the owners and the big bosses, and now this isn't recently, but in my past I've worked at places where owners and big bosses have been drug users. And they work like they're on drugs because they have to pay for their drugs. Okay, I know we are getting close to the end of the broadcast here. I wanted to cover something. This was a long article. I'm probably not going to be able to cover it all. I do want to cover a little bit of it. And this was at sovereignman.com. And it's titled, After 1,428 Years, Here's What Brought Down the World's Oldest Business. In 578 AD, a Korean immigrant named Shingmitsu Kongo made his way to Japan at the invitation of the royal family. Buddhism was on the rise in Japan at the time, though it had only been introduced a few decades prior. The Empress Consort had been actively encouraging the adoption of Buddhism across Japan, but since the Japanese had no experience building Buddhist temples, they looked overseas for help. That's where Kongo came in. Shingmitsu Kongo was a renowned temple builder, and the royal family in Japan commissioned him to build the Shinnyo-ji Temple, which still stands today in Osaka. Kongo saw an incredible opportunity. Buddhism was catching on fast, and he knew he could be kept busy for decades building temples. It turned out to be centuries, over 14 centuries, in fact. Shingmitsu Kongo formed his construction company in 578 AD. Gumi was the company, and it lasted 1,428 years. It's extraordinary that any single enterprise could last so long. Even as late as 2004, temple building accounted for more than 80% of the company's revenue, which exceeded $60 million US. But 10 years ago, the company finally went under due to massive debt burden that had accumulated. It started back in the 1980s as Japan was in the midst of an epic financial bubble thanks to unconstrained credit growth and expansion of the money supply. Go figure, central banks artificially suppressed interest rates, keeping them way too low for way too long, and it created a huge asset bubble. Asset prices in Japan got so out of control For a short time during the 1980s, it was said that grounds of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo were worth more than all the real estate in the entire state of California. As part of this bubble, banks had relaxed their lending standards and were handing out loans to just about anyone, and many Japanese companies took on vast amounts of debt, including Congo Gumi. Debt was like a popular drug, everyone was doing it, but when the bubble ended in 1989, asset prices collapsed and companies that had borrowed heavily were left with nothing but debt. Congo Gumi didn't go out of business right away. The company was able to limp along for more than 2 decades on basic life support. Soon they were borrowing money just to pay interest on the money they had already borrowed, even though interest rates were at record lows. But eventually the company's revenues were no longer sufficient to service the debt. In 2006, Congo Gumi was forced into liquidation. The company lasted over 1,400 years. They survived countless political crises, wars, and natural disasters. They survived the Meiji Restoration in the 1800s, a period in which the government set out to eradicate Buddhism from Japan and hence the temple building industry. They even survived 2 atomic bombs. What Congo Gumi couldn't survive was debt. It doesn't matter if you are an individual, a company, a government, or even a central bank. If your balance sheet doesn't add up, sooner or later, you're going under. It's concerning to see consumer debt once again on the rise in the land of the free, at the fastest pace since the days of the financial bubble. Perhaps most appropriate was a Super Bowl commercial from Quicken Loans advertising how easy they have made it to obtain a loan. Push button, get mortgage, says the commercial. More appropriate would be push button, get into debt, then buy more useless stuff. It's a blatant snapshot of how far along we are in the latest financial bubble. Of course, most Western governments are in the position as well. They can go further into debt with a few strokes of the pen. No surprise that many governments must borrow money to pay interest on money they've already borrowed, even at a time when interest rates are at record lows. And yet the lending mainstream economic minds claim that debt and money printing are actually cures to economic problems and not causes of them. As my colleague Tim Price points out, medieval doctors used to advocate leeches as a way to cure sick people. Yet this approach turned out to be largely ineffective and tended to kill the patient. Sometimes the final consequences take years, even decades. Old established institutions have the ability to kick the can down the road just like Congo Gumi did. And even in terminal decline, they can even give the appearance of strength. Just a few years before its demise, Congo Gumi was still a media darling that seemed strong, fit, and likely to last another 1,400 years. The LA Times, for example, ran a story in 2003 praising the company for its deft ability to outlast Japan's tough economic conditions. Congo Gumi folded less than 3 years later. This is an incredible, important lesson. Debt is a killer, and no one is immune to this inevitability. And again, that one was from sovereignman.com. Sovereignman.com. And it was titled, After 1,428 Years, Here's What Brought Down the World's Oldest Business. That has a temple that is still standing from 578 AD. And we will suffer this fate eventually. Because again, we're not looking for someone to actually bring us out of it. Just attack the other side. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. And don't forget to go to ucy.tv. There's a support tab at the top, and you can donate to ucy.tv to give this great platform for me and the other hosts here to get information and our views and our opinions out there to you. Also, if you scroll down to the bottom on UCY.tv, there's an Amazon button. Check out UCY's Amazon store. Great product, same great prices, and UCY gets a kickback. Also, go to antityrannynews.com/metal. Check out Amagi Metals. Don't forget to have a little bit of fallback if we run into economic troubles. Again, antityrannynews.com/metal and also UCY.tv. Again, thank you all for joining in this evening. And stay tuned here on UCY.tv. Great broadcast coming up after this.